Hey guys, my name is Emmeline, and in this video we will be discussing the options breakdown. In this video we're going to discuss what are options, calls and puts, and a full options breakdown. So, what are options? An option is a contract that gives you the right to buy or sell the underlying security, but not the obligation. Basically, you don't have to buy or sell, but you can at a predefined time and price. So, I know when most people see options, they see it as this very complicated thing and something that's filled with risk. But in this video, I'm going to try to break that down as best as I can for you guys so you guys can have a better grasp and understand this subject. So, there are two types of options. There is what's known as a call and what's known as a put. A call option, you believe that the underlying asset will increase in value, and for a put, it's the exact opposite. You believe that the value of the underlying asset will decrease. So, let's say you bought, as an option buyer, you bought a call at a strike price of $30. Now, I'll dive into what a strike price is later on, but in this example, you don't really need to know what that is just yet. So, at the end of the expiration date, you have a right to buy 100 shares at $30, but you do not have to. You have a right, but not the obligation. Now, for a put, let's go with that same example, $30 strike price. Now, instead of having a right to buy for calls, for puts, you have a right to sell 100 shares at $30 strike price. Let's look at this options call example. We have a buyer, James. He's looking to buy this Tesla for $30,000. He's not too sure if the value of this car will increase or decrease, but he has an idea that it will increase because let's say he sees more demand for it and he sees how they can increase the price of their autopilot feature every year. So because of this, James doesn't want to buy the car right now for $30,000. Instead, he wants to have the right to buy it for $30,000 in 2 months. Now, he has the right, not the obligation. So, this is Mike. He's the owner of this Tesla. Mike sees this and sees that James wants to have rights over this car for 2 months, and if he chooses to do so at the end of the 2 months, purchase this vehicle for $30,000. So Mike, he basically has to hold the rights and hold the rights for James. So he sees this and says, because I'm going to hold this for you, I will require a deposit. Now, this deposit is what's known as the premium. This is basically the options contract price. So, since it is 2 months, James pays Mike a premium of $2,000. Now, let's say if this was, let's say 2 weeks, the pricing of this premium would be substantially less. It would be around, let's say, 4 to 500. Now, I'm just using random numbers as an example, but the idea is when there's less time, the options contract is valued less. So let's break down the contract. So, in this contract, the strike price, James has the right to buy the car from Mike for $30,000. The strike price is the value that you want to buy the underlying asset for at the end of the expiration period. Now, the expiration period for this contract is 2 months. Now, at the end of the 2 months, James can choose to either buy the car for $30,000 or either just let it expire and not buy this car. Now, this 2 months leads into the premium. Now, James paid Mike a deposit, also known as the premium, of $2,000 for this contract right. Now, since it was 2 months, the contract was more expensive. If it was 1 to 2 weeks, like we discussed in the last slide, it would be way less because James is trying to buy time to see if this vehicle will increase in value. Now, if James decides not to buy the car, his total loss will be the deposit, also known as the premium, which was $2,000. So, at the end of the expiration, at the end of this 2 months, James can either buy the car for $30,000 or choose not to, and his total loss is capped at $2,000, which is how much he paid for the premium. Now, let's break down some scenarios. Let's say the value of the car increases to $50,000. So, based on contract, Mike must still sell the car to James for $30,000 if James still wants it at the end of the 2 month period. Now, James can either buy the car at expiration for $30,000 or sell his deposit, which is the premium, for a profit. Now, let's break this last part down. So, James, at the end of the 2 month period, buys this car for $30,000. Now, he goes to the market and sells it for $50,000, netting him a $20,000 profit. He can either do that or sell his deposit for a profit. Now, when the underlying asset increases in value, the premium does not stay constant. It also increases in value. So, we as options traders can also flip the premium we pay for a profit. Now, even though the price of the vehicle almost doubled, Mike must still sell the car to James for $30,000 because he gave him the right for that contract if he still wanted it at the end of the 2 month period. Now, let's look at another scenario. So, let's say in this scenario, the value of the Tesla decreases to $20,000. Now, based on contract, Mike must still sell the car to James for $30,000 if James still wants it at the end of the 2 month period. So, if James chooses to exercise this option, it would be a bad play because he is paying more for a car that he could just buy at market for less. So, James can either buy the car at expiration for $30,000, which he would not do because that is just common sense and he's not willing to be down $10,000 automatically, or he can let his contract expire. Since James had the right, not the obligation, to execute his contract, his only loss is the $2,000, which was the deposit. Now, we as option traders must understand that our losses are capped at whatever we pay for the premium. This is just a standard with any other type of investment that involves risk. We should be willing to know that our premiums can go down all the way to zero. Our losses are always capped at the amount of money we put in. Now, we're going to use the same people for this put example. So, we have our buyer James and our seller Mike. James looks at the Supra and he thinks that the price will decrease in over the next 3 months because he's seeing that the demand for it keeps decreasing. So he believes that the price will decrease because of that. So, buyer James goes over and talks to Mike. He tells him, I want to enter into a put contract with you. So, they agree on the $40,000 strike price for 3 months. So, at the end of the 3 months, buyer James, which is the buyer of this put contract, can sell this Supra for $40,000 to Mike. Remember, a put contract is the right to sell the underlying asset because you believe that the price will decrease. increase. So, same as before, Mike wants a premium to hold it for 3 months to see if James still wants to sell it to Mike at the end of that expiration period. So, since this car is at $40,000 and this expiration date is 3 months, they agree and enter into a premium worth $5,000. Let's also break the terms of this contract. So, the strike price. James has the right to sell the car for $40,000 to Mike. Now, James wanted 3 months because he expects that the price will decrease over the next 3 months. So the time frame and the expiration was 3 months. Now the premium that James paid Mike was $5,000 because James is holding the right to sell it to Mike for 3 months. Now, if James decides not to sell the car at the end of the 3 months, his total loss will be the deposit. So, to break this down, James wants the right to sell this car for $40,000 at the end of the 3-month period to Mike for $40,000. Now, James can either, at the end of expiration, choose to sell it to Mike or just let it expire and his max loss is capped as the premium that was paid for it. Now let's dive into the put contract scenarios. So, let's say the value of the car increases to $50,000. So, keep in mind, James wanted the price of the car to decrease. So, this went against his process. So, based on the contract, James has the right to still sell that car for $40,000 at the end of the 3-month period. But if he chooses to do that, he'll be at a loss of $10,000 because James doesn't have this car yet. Basically, what would need to happen is he would go into the market and purchase this car for $50,000 and then sell it to Mike for $40,000, which is a bad play because why would he choose to sell the car for a loss when he can let it expire? Which leads us to this. James can either sell the car at expiration for a loss, which doesn't make sense, or sell his premium. So his max loss is capped as his deposit. Now let's look at another put contract scenario. So let's say this time the value of the car decreases to $10,000. So this went in the direction that James was hoping for. So based on contract, James has the right to sell the car for $40,000 at the end of the 3-month period. Now, James can either sell the car at expiration to Mike or sell his premium. Let's break this down. So, James physically does not have the car. So, what would occur is he would go to the market, buy this car for $10,000, and then exercise his right to sell it to Mike for $40,000, netting him a $30,000 profit because the value of the car decreased just like James predicted, and Mike agreed to buy the car for $40,000 from James if he chooses to do so at the end of the 3-month period. Since James had the right, not the obligation, to execute his contract, his only loss will be the deposit. So, he could either sell the car at expiration or sell his premium. Like I discussed in one of the previous call contract scenarios, when when the underlying asset goes in the direction of your initial play. So in this case, it was a put contract. When the price goes down, the premium does not stay stagnant. It moves. With a put, it makes money when the underlying asset decreased in value, which we saw in this. Now, James paid $5,000 for this contract, right? So, since this underlying asset decreased in value, this option contract would, let's say, also increase in value. Let's say it increased to, let's say, $8,000. So, before the expiration date, James can sell this to another buyer and make $3,000 by flipping the premium since it went in his direction. So even though the current value is worth $10,000, Mike still entered into a contract with James, promising to buy it for $40,000. Now, in this scenario, there was more profit if he was able to exercise his option and buy it for $10,000 and then sell it to James for $40,000. Most of the time, this is not the case. We as option traders make more money by flipping the contracts. It's not a matter of more money, it's the opportunities. There are more opportunities to profit off of contract flips than to profit off of exercising an option. But only exercise an option if there is more profit to be made off buying or selling the underlying asset than flipping the contract itself, or unless you really want 100 shares or that much in equity. So, just to recap everything, options are contracts between two parties. Option buyers pay a small premium to control the underlying asset from the seller. You pick your strike price and expiration beforehand. Calls, you profit when the underlying asset increases in value, while puts will profit when the underlying asset decreases in value.